This is the third launch we've done at this stage. Our first launch was a soft launch at the ploughing. And then we had our main official launch in Buswells on the 19th above in Dublin. And this is just an online follow-up in case people couldn't make it. My own name is Thomas O'Connor. I'm an organic farmer down from Kerry. I own and run Manor Organic Farm and Store with my wife Claire, and I was project lead for our Methane Matters. We have Milo who's here, who was our project coordinator, project manager, and then Sean who's here also, who was our lead researcher and put together our position paper. We initially were going to write a policy paper around methane, but realised we didn't actually have the in-depth knowledge. So what we wanted to do is take a broader perspective and put forward a position paper looking at methane through the lens of true food systems transformation, as opposed to just looking at methane itself. Part of the project was about engaging with farmers, engaging with the community, understanding what people think of methane and seeing what the bottlenecks about people engaging with it, and then widening out the conversation. So it was about not just about the cow, it was about the how and looking at the entire food system and food chain that exists there.
This project came about, we're part of a 2-year project across Europe, and we only entered into the project properly actually in January, the end of January, beginning of February last year. So we had to do an awful lot of work to catch up with all the other partners. There's 17 partners in total across Europe, and we were the only Irish partner, but also, even though we were looking at methane, we were the only partner actually looking at directly involved in agriculture, as in the only farming organization in the whole project, which is quite crazy. There was only 4 organizations out of the 17 looking at agriculture. Other ones were looking at ozone, other ones were looking at food and waste, and another section looking at energy. So we were really lucky that we got brought on board, and the fact that we were the only one in Ireland and that we were the only farmers. But it also gave us a lot of responsibility. And my job within the project was to make sure that we kind of, I suppose, delivered on what the project was written to do, but also that we tried not to leave any of our farmers behind and bring everyone with us and get everyone's voices into our paper. And then. So luckily enough, we found Sean here who'll tell you what he did.
Well, thanks, Milo. Yeah, I live just down the road from Milo up in Donegal. And so my background's in environmental and marine science, and many moons ago, and I did work on methane sensors for a company for a few years. So I happened to mention that to Milo. I think it was last Christmas, wasn't it, Milo? And he went, we need to have a conversation, he said. So from that, I ended up starting working with Talamh Beo for the first time on this project in January. And yeah, we had a lot of catching up to do. So I'm sure Thomas will take us through this, but just very briefly, we managed to really leverage the network of Talamh Beo and get a wonderful, wonderful group of participant farmers and researchers and community activists together for our group to start to really look at what do we mean by methane reduction through food systems transformation. So we did a lot of work in the first sort of 3 to 4 months around that, and using the 3 horizons process just to tease out, what are the current reality, the problems of the current scenario that we're facing, what are the ideal solutions and the ideal scenario, and what are the sort of steps that we could start to point to and sort of work up to try and create some recommendations that we could talk about in our position paper. And then the second half of the project has really been the sort of dissemination to the general public, to government, and to various different events around the country. So Thomas will be taking us through that.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to do a small bit of a slideshow presentation to run through the project and give an overview, and then we'll do questions and answers afterwards. So yeah, this is our third launch. When we got approached to be a partner in this wider European project with Methane Matters, we weren't really experts on methane, but we realized how important a conversation methane was and how relevant it was to our current agricultural practices in Ireland. And so our approach to it was not just looking at methane itself, but looking at it through the lens of food systems transformation. So a little bit of a background. Talamh Beo means a living land, and we're about reconnecting land, people and community. We are a farmers and a citizens organisation, and we work basically on food sovereignty and agroecology. So like food sovereignty, at the moment we have a big focus in Ireland on food security. The only problem with food security, it's very dependent on financial transactions to be able to turn around and buy in the inputs we need for our agricultural system or buy in the foodstuff it needs. It's very much commodity, crops and livestock based. It's dependent on imported inputs for agribusiness. It's also very fragile and doesn't have build much resilience and sustainability into the system. And again, there's a lot of external costs that aren't really shown in our current agricultural system. Food sovereignty is ensuring that we have more of the skills and the knowledge and the genetics well held within our community, and more focused on local food systems and diversified food webs, and using the basis of agroecological and local resources. It's about building community resilience and then also respecting nature and culture and improving the biodiversity in our agricultural systems. So one of the foundations is agroecology, and that's kind of an overview or an umbrella expression of, it includes organics, it includes permaculture, it includes biodynamics, all the systems around agriculture under one space. The other objective then is looking at short food supply chains, because again we have a very fragile agricultural system that's dependent on a lot of external inputs, and if the boat stop, if there's an issue with oil or there's some externality, it means that we don't necessarily have the ability to feed our own population from within the island of Ireland. So a lot of stuff Talamh Beo does is around building agroecology and food sovereignty. Agroecology kind of came scientifically about the 1930s, came to terms, and that was when they started putting the plant into the ground, and they wanted to know how that plant has a connection with everything else around in its environment. But realistically, agroecology is the system that was used by ancient cultures for millennia when they lived as part of a natural and biological system. So Talamh Beo, we have about 300 members in Ireland. We're also part of ECVC and Levia Campesino. So ECVC is about 250,000 members around Europe, and about 200 million members internationally. One of the big things with Talamh Beo and food sovereignty is solidarity. Solidarity with understanding of what's going on in external food systems and how we feed ourselves here in Ireland. One of the big reasons for looking at it like that is in Ireland, we're told we need to have our current agricultural practices and commodity-based systems because that's how we feed the world. The reality is at the moment, 70% of the world's population is fed on traditional and cultural food systems, and only 30% of the world's population is fed on industrial and commodity agriculture. Yet it's flipped the other way around, because industrial and commodity agriculture uses nearly 70% of the land and resources, and the traditional systems use 30%. So it's about going back and having a deeper understanding of our food systems. So yeah, when we approached this project, it was looking at methane matters, because it does matter. It's a really important gas, because it's almost like a handbrake that we can put on. It's something we can deal with at the moment and give us a little bit of leeway as we deal with the other gases. The point is, when we look at food systems transformation and looking at the whole system, it's not just about the methane, it's about the carbon, it's about all the other gases, it's about all the greenhouse gases together. Methane is important to focus in on, because in Ireland in particular, with our commoditisation and our large scale beef and dairy farming, and because we've so many animals consolidated into smaller spaces, it goes beyond the carrying capacity of the land, which causes a lot of issues there. So when we looked at the system, or we put forward the proposition paper, it was to outline agroecological pathways to reduce methane emissions in Ireland. We knew that farmers were a key part of this, so it was important to go out and meet farmers and meet the community, understand what they thought of methane in the first place, an individual greenhouse gas. And a lot of the time when we met people, when they talked about methane, they almost kind of locked down around it, because it was either too scientific or it was too narrow of a perspective. But as we started drawing it out and making the link between methane and the larger greenhouse gases and the wider food system, then there was more of an understanding towards it. Why methane matters? Well, it's the second largest greenhouse gas in Ireland through our agricultural system. Our livestock system is the main part of it. And then policies at the moment are focused on feed additives, shortening the lifespan of the animals, and vaccines, whereas we want to really look at looking at not just what's happening with the cow on the farm, but looking at the inputs that are coming into the farm and looking at the full supply chain, which is the delivery of the food out the other end of it. The problems with the current system is they are export driven. There's low margins for farmers that put farmers on the edge all the time because it's become about intensification rather than diversification. And because farmers don't get paid enough for the produce they have, they're forced to put more and more animals into a small space. And also then there's extremely high cost to our biodiversity. So food system transformation is looking at agroecology and food sovereignty, trying to diversify our farming systems. And when we say diversify the farming system, we don't mean take a dairy farmer and tell them to grow grain or start growing vegetables, but how do we find a way for the farmers to diversify so they can bring more of an income in and put less pressure so they're not as much of a treadmill. We understand that over the last couple of decades, farmers have had to invest heavily in infrastructure and stuff on the farms, which means that they have an economic pressure on them. So it's very hard for them to transition from the positions that they're in. So we need to meet farmers along the way. The key recommendations is taking that's Charles there. The key recommendations are taking a bioregional approach, reducing the animal numbers, but not necessarily taking animals out of the system. Animals are sacred around the world, particularly cows. They're there because they're primary ingesters, digesters. They inoculate the soil. They're part of the best farming practices throughout history. Were always mixed farming systems, but now we've consolidated too many animals in one space without taking in the consequences of that. The other thing is looking at aerobic digestion, but looking at it on a farm scale, and then looking at energy production for farmers so they can help diversify, and then looking at a way that farmers can engage with policy and with the politics. So I'll just play a short video there now for you.
Hello there, my name is Jeremy and I was involved with an IPCC assessment report, so I'm involved with climate change and climate change policy. And we're here launching our Methane Matters project at the Ploughing Championships. The Methane Matters project is part of a European project and we're looking at how methane can be mitigated in Irish agricultural systems. So obviously climate change is a big issue, a growing issue, and a lot of the targets that were set to keep the world at a sort of a relatively safe temperature, we're almost missing those. It's almost certainly that we're going to miss some of them. And so climate change is a big issue. Methane is a really important gas within the three main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane. But methane is particularly useful because it's unique in terms of it's a short-lived climate forcer, so when it's emitted into the atmosphere, it's broken down within about 12 years. And because of this, it's useful in terms of rapidly reducing the rate of increasing temperature globally. It's described as the emergency brake. So if we reduce methane emissions, because it's a short-lived gas, it may allow us to slow down the warming of the climate. And Talamh Beo are sort of unique as in they are looking at farmers' opinions or farmers' experiences of methane and how to tackle this. Methane mitigation strategies that are currently being investigated or researched are very much specifically looking at technical aspects of methane mitigation. So they're designed for only reducing methane emissions in ruminants, for example, or in manure management and so on. Whereas Talamh Beo have looked at a holistic system and looked at the whole farming system and have tried to identify areas where changing that entire system could prevent or reduce methane emissions. So they're quite unique in that regard, and they've come up with several different recommendations, all based on agroecological farming.
So that was Jeremy there. He was a great addition to the project as well and brought a lot of expertise to the situation. So the Methane Matters project was a project that explored how farmers envision a future system that reduced methane emissions without sacrificing their livelihoods or their ecological integrity. The project mapped solutions that promoted long-term ecological thinking, utilising farmers and community-led approaches which were based on agroecological practices. Talamh Beo was a partner in the Methane Matters Coalition, which is a group of experienced non-governmental organisations that aim to significantly reduce methane emissions in agriculture, waste and energy sectors by 2030 and strengthen the EU's leadership in implementing the global methane commitment in alignment with the Global Methane Pledge. So the Methane Matters project overall was funded from a fund that wanted to turn around and ensure that countries were able to support the Global Methane Pledge and look at methane in more detail. It was great dealing with the 17 different organisations because they had a vast experience and a lot of technical knowledge that we didn't actually have directly ourselves on the ground. But then, like I can definitely say we know an awful lot more about methane now and how it interacts with the system from learning from the other partners and the stuff that went on. So why is methane a problem? Well, much of our global food system is based on specialized production systems that are dependent on intensive fertilizers, pesticides, machinery use, and often cheap and exploitative labor. These systems prioritize scientific and technological approaches of food production, which are disconnected from the natural cycles that sustain life on Earth itself. So a lot of them are very biologically damaging, and a lot of the issues that come from those intensive systems are externalized and not seen directly. Our global food system also relies on extensive transportation systems to distribute produce throughout the long supply chains. So the transformation of Ireland's food system, which is what Talamh Beo is always trying to do, moving towards agroecological and food sovereignty systems, is not only necessary for meaningful methane mitigation, but is also essential for building climate resilience, ecological recovery and social justice. So Talamh Beo, through our position paper, is calling for a coordinated national transition strategy, which is rooted in agroecology and food sovereignty, and guided by the lived experiences of experience and leadership of farmers and the community themselves, because these are the people we need to be able to bring on board in order to be effective. So we had two phases in the project. The first phase was an action research phase, and that's where we engaged 12 farmers from across 9 counties in Ireland, and they were from conventional and organic. They were dairy, beef, sheep. There were people involved in direct sales, tillage, arable and horticulture, and mixed farming involving pigs, poultry and goats. The idea was to get as wide a perspective as we possibly can on the conversation and to be able to bring that back to it. We had a second phase, which I'll go into in a second, but in the first phase in the research, we used the 3 Horizons framework, which was looking at, number one, business as usual, about mapping the current reality and the challenges of reducing methane as perceived by the participant group, which was our farmers. And then Horizon 3, which is the emerging future, mapping the emerging alternatives that are required to shift the current industrialized system to agroecologically forced system. And then Horizon 2 was about the transition, mapping of the ideas and the solutions and mechanisms required. Phase 2 was about dissemination of it. So once we gathered our farmers together, and we had a couple of the direct in-person meetings, and then we had Zoom calls with them. Then we turned around and we wanted to put that information that we had taken from the farmers out into the general public and get feedback from the general public. So we did farm walks on participant farms. So the farmers invited people out from the public out onto their farms. They talked about agroecology, they talked about what they're doing on the farm, and they talked about methane. And for that we produced a 1-page flyer. But we did that for Heritage Week, I think, across how many farms, Milo? There was 14?
Well, 12 farms.
12 farms, okay, yeah. Then we turned around and went to public events, like we went to Global Green and the Electric Picnic, and the idea was there to be able to turn around and engage with people at a different type of level, which would be more community engagement, because we were in the Global Green, and in the Global Green there was a lot of community groups there, so we were able to interact with the community groups and hold talks, but then we were open to the public as well. Then we went to the National Ploughing Championships, where we did our first soft launch for it, where we also went out and we engaged with the department and MEPs and TDs, and we presented our position paper, and we tried to engage in the conversation for an event that was happening in Brussels, that for the official launch of it. The idea there then is we were dealing and engaging directly with farmers, which was one perspective, as well as the public. The idea along the whole process was to have as much empathy as possible, understand where people are coming from when we're talking about the conversation around methane. So your public and your farmers, depending on your type of farmer and depending on your person in the public, would have different perspectives of it. So it was about building as broad a picture as you possibly can, so we can turn on and build a story around it. Then we were at Biofarm in November, and that was an opportunity to give a presentation and to have a stall and talk to people that were passing through that. And Biofarm is like a fantastic place. It's a biological farming event that happens every year. It's a great diverse collection of regenerative and all types of alternative farmers, both conventional and organic. So it's a great place to turn around and engage with people. What we were able to do there is on the day before Biofarm, we invited FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, to bring over and demonstrate their tool on agroecology. And the idea is that we can turn around and use that tool to integrate for the transition to a more agroecological practices. And it's not about being one or the other. It's a really good tool because it turns around and it lets people see where they are, whether you're organic or conventional or what kind of system you are, where you are in agroecological practices, and then how you can turn around and move along that process. The other advantage of the tape tool is it's not just what's happening on the farm from an agroecological point of view, it's also about the wider context of the community and the society around you. So it brings all that together. And like probably 10 years ago when the Water Framework Directive was starting to come in, and we knew in the future a lot of the policy and legislation would be built around that. The agroecology is now starting to gain a lot of traction in Europe, so a lot of the funding, a lot of the supports into the future will be based on agroecology. It's also one of the biggest issues we've had over the years. As we talk about alternative systems of agriculture, particularly on agroecology, is that it's always about the science. And unfortunately, a lot of the time we don't have the science to back up. We have a lot of underground information and experience the farmers are working from, but to be able to turn around and quantify that in an Irish context. The tape tool has been rolled out all around the world, except it's in third world countries as opposed to in the Western world or Europe, so it needs a little bit of adaptation. But it's a really good tool for engagement. And then we had our launch in November at Buswell's Hotel. And unfortunately, we ended up having a major debate on the Murrisker trade deal at the exact same time. So we didn't have as many people as we wanted there, which is why we were doing the online launch there. But we had a good few politicians and people passed through, so it was a good way of engaging. So again, the process for engagement was the three horizons. So out of that came a couple of things. We had direct enablers for methane reduction. So reducing animal numbers and methane emissions through bioregional and agroecological approach. It was about creating bioregional diversification, supporting farmers to diversify to horticulture, mixed farming, cereals, legumes and forestry, and using of the tape tool to evaluate agroecological performance. But it was mainly also about creating and protecting the farmers' livelihoods so they didn't feel threatened when they talked about, if we talk about a herd reduction, often farmers feel threatened because it is it's almost like you're threatening their livelihood and what they're doing. It's about how do we help farmers transition away from the necessity to be so intensely stocked. So it was about ensuring that farms have an income and is protecting during the transition period. Then also one of the things that came up a lot was looking at energy and anaerobic digestion. So if we're trying to help farmers to diversify a little bit and take some of the economic pressure off of them, one of the big issues was energy costs. So there is the energy cost of running the tractors, the energy cost of all the inputs to come onto the farm. But one of the primary ones for dairy and beef is actually heating your water and keeping your parlour and stuff going. And unfortunately, what the reality is, a lot of farmers that want to put solar panels on the roof, even though there might be grants that are there, one of the biggest issues is they constantly can't get connections through the ESB. So this is one of the things that come out of the project that we're going to try and put a push on. The other one is looking at anaerobic digestion, but looking at anaerobic digestion, not where you have one big centre plant, but looking at it on farm. So trying to deal with the material on farm without all the transportation that's involved in it. And again, like you say, supporting and enabling solar and wind microgeneration on farms as well as within our communities. So the key direct recommendations are to promote systems-based understanding of methane reduction. That's about knowing that tackling emissions requires looking beyond the industrially farmed animals. It's not just about the cow, but how we farm. A systems-based approach which recognises the deep connections between biodiversity, farm resilience and rural livelihoods. It's about public education and advocacy to shift the conversation towards a broader understanding, one that can link the climate action to a thriving local communities and show that farmers can be a benefit rather than the actual primary issue, which is a lot of what a society is looking at the moment. It was about supporting and looking at bioregional agroecological approaches to farming, encouraging farming methods that are grounded in local ecosystems and economies. In Ireland, we tend to have one size fits all, and it's spread across the entire country. It's about understanding each farm is different. So turning around and looking from the east to the west coast, you need to take in that when you're dealing with the systems. And building an understanding how diversified and small-scale farms can contribute meaningfully to reducing methane emissions and play a vital role in building resilient and sustainable agriculture and community in Ireland. enable on-farm renewable energy generation, so developing supports and policies that allow farmers to generate renewable energy through microgeneration and creating a complementary income stream that strengthens the long-term viability of their farms. It's about empowering farmers to participate in policy making. Sometimes farmers feel that they're on the outside, and it's only when policy and legislation is brought in, and it's always a reaction as opposed to engagement at the start of the process. And again, one of the things that came up is we used to have a great cooperative model in Ireland where the benefit that came from our agricultural practices and from our farming systems were reinvested back into the community. Over the last half decade, a lot of our cooperatives became corporations. So in the past, where the primary shareholder in a cooperative was the community and the benefits came back to it, now the primary shareholder is external to our environment and our community and our island, and it comes down to just profits. And again, all those external costs then are pushed outside of the farm and the price itself. It was we wanted to create a direct education framework for food systems transformation over time, looking at a broader perspective, so to develop accessible education and training programs for farmer policymakers and the public. These should highlight the benefits of agroecological farming and provide a credible counter-narrative to the industrialised food system. Again, unfortunately, we've 30-40 years where most of our farmers, 2 or 3 generations, have been conditioned to industrial, chemical and commodity-based agriculture. And yes, organics have gained a lot of ground in the last couple of years, but it's really we need to have a wider conversation on agroecology, nature and biodiversity when we're dealing with our farm systems, and to understand that these farming systems, apart from the last 50 to 100 years of industrialised agriculture, previous to that, everything was based around nature and ecology and biology. And that's what's happened through all of our entire evolution. So there's no reason that we can't transition back to that again. And again, the foundation of that is taking a wider perspective and looking at food systems transformation, which is an approach that addresses the root causes of climate, ecological and social crises by questioning and redesigning of our whole food production and distribution systems. So we need to look at the entire system. A lot of the time, like I say, it's very much concentrated, particularly on the cow, measuring what's coming out of his mouth or its other end, whereas actually we need to be measuring everything along that supply chain that's coming into the farm and everything along that supply chain from the end of the farm all the way to the consumer, which is why it's really important that it's a whole society and community conversation that's happening. One of the indirect approaches, or one of the indirect outcomes that came from it, is that we have taken a very strong position against GWP star and the changing of metrics around the measurement of methane in Ireland. We've seen in the last month or so that New Zealand has changed its measurement of greenhouse gases, and it's used GWP star. Our problem is that it's almost like an accounting trick. It's turning around and it doesn't actually address the existing system. What it does is it sets the existing system as the new standard, and if you are better or worse from that standard, but it damages the long-term ability for smaller farmers to adapt and to change internationally. So what we just want to make sure is that we maintain the existing metrics that are used at the moment for measuring methane and greenhouse gases, and any metrics that are being changed, that it is a community and a whole agricultural system approach, and it not just agribusiness, because at the moment it looks like very much there'll be a sleight of hand that will change the metrics and keep our existing system as it is, without actually changing anything in the background, just making us more greenhouse efficient. So, like I said, the whole idea was to create a vision and how we can transition to agroecology as a food system transformation, looking at our current reality, looking at the transition pathways we can take, and then looking at what Ireland might be into the future if we had an agroecological, non-chemical and industrial-based agricultural system. So our current reality is we have agribusiness, which is industrially based. We have huge biodiversity loss. We have exit of youth from the land because they don't see a future in it because they're on an economic treadmill. We have input dependency, which is creating huge financial dependence for our farmers. We have land speculation. So in Ireland, we not only have large dairy farmers getting larger because we have carbon credits, we have external vulture funds coming in and buying land, which means it's not accessible to people that want to expand on a smaller scale or new people that want to get into the land. So we essentially have farmer exclusion from farming because of all of these things. The transition pathways, we need to create demonstration areas. We need to turn around and take the knowledge that we're gaining, but we need to actually have little islands of experience around the country, because a farmer learns, really. We can learn a lot from a book or a podcast, but it's actually on the ground when we go out and see what other farmers are doing that makes a big impact on it. So it's about creating demonstration sites, both on the catchment scale, understanding that your farm isn't just in itself, that it's like connected with a wider community, but then it's also connected within your water frame and your water catchment area. Reinvigorating our cooperative and having honest, open education, as opposed to just very much commodity, industrial, chemical-based education that we have at the moment. And then the future in agroecological Ireland, where we want to go, where we have like renewables, we've restored our water and soil, we've stronger community, we have educational reform, we have educational research that's honest and open and unbiased, and then we have a narrative shift, and we have regional planning depending on the suitability of the environment that's there. So in Horizon 1, the main thing that came out of that was looking at there was unrealistic policy targets that existed at the moment, whether that's agrivision or the 2 or 3 policies that came before that. It was what was highlighted was the corporate dominance and input dependence. There was a loss of traditional knowledge and information and culture, and there was fewer farmers interacting and engaging with farming systems. We had land and sales speculations. We have greenwashing and poor metrics that don't necessarily reflect what's happening on the ground or the true picture. And then what we can see with our rivers and the nitrates and everything else is that we have a gradual degradation of our biology and ecology. So our once green island is not as green anymore, and even though that's what we promote ourselves to. So the transition, the Horizon 2 was about the pathways, and that was farmer-led policies, demonstration farms, catchment scale biodigesters, cooperative reform, education and research, narrative shift. And then we have what we hope to be in the future, an agroecological Ireland, which is about diversified mixed enterprises, local food webs, bioregional planning, alternative cooperatives, and revitalised and improved soil health and water. And why do we do that? Because we want to put the culture back into agriculture. At the moment in Ireland, we have agribusiness, and that's the main driver. We need to put the culture and connect our food and our people and our community back into our food systems. So yeah, that's a very long way and very broad way of saying that methane does matter. It's a very narrow conversation, but it can be broadened out to a wider conversation around the situation. So the implementation opportunities, we have our position paper now. Officially this project ends, I think, in about 2 weeks. But between January and February, we're reaching out to our MEPs and our politicians again to try and make sure that the policies are there. We need to have a climate, or is it the National Climate Policy, NDC? Yeah. So we need to turn around and ensure that as that's developed in Ireland, that methane is kept part of it and there's a wider conversation happening around it. And we need to support local strategies like Talamh Beo has our local food policy, which works in short food supply chains and stuff like that. And ultimately, it's about engaging with government, because as farmers and as a community and society, the framework that we operate in comes from policy and legislation. Unfortunately, that policy and legislation has been framed over the last 20 or 30 years by agribusiness, as opposed to what's better for the farmer or the community or the society or the environment. So methane is the problem, but it's only a symptom of our existing broken food system. And it's about moving away from industrial agriculture, building government policy for farmers and community, where we are looking and focusing on healthy soil, biodiversity and agroecology. So if you want to learn some more, our position paper is there. You can scan the code or you can go to our website. And yeah, I think I've talked enough there now for a bit. So I'm going to turn off the slideshow, and if people have any questions.
Thank you, Thomas.
Or comments.
Well, kick off with one comment, I suppose, was one more thing was the FAO came to present the tape tool. They're looking to roll the tool out more across Europe, and they're also willing to work with us to develop the tool so that it works better for Ireland. And there's some work happening on it at the moment in Romania and Italy. So there is a couple of countries have started, and there's a number of youth groups within Agroecological Europe are also looking at using it. So there's a number of universities that's looking at it. So it is still at the developmental stage, because an awful lot of it's been used a huge amount across African nations and third world countries, and it is definitely geared more towards those nations, but it is something that we could use in the future here. So it's definitely useful.
and it creates a great opportunity that's like a middle ground where people can easily assess where they're standing at the moment and how they can improve it. Now, the tool does need adaptation for Ireland, and yeah, and we can adapt it looking at more soil biodiversity and hedgerows and stuff like that. So I'd say over the next while that'll be more of a concentration. Just turn on my chat there. Does anybody else have a comment or?
Can I butt in? Sorry, Pippa here. I'm sorry, I'm in the
Absolutely.
car, but I'm all hands free. I've just pressed a button. But I just wanted to say, thanks very much, Thomas, for that. And I mean, there's a lot there, but you expressed it so succinctly and with passion as usual. So I think it's great to see this being addressed in a very sort of progressive, farmer-friendly way, because as you identified, when we talk about methane, it's always about the cows and nothing else. Rarely do we hear much debate about the methane from fossil fuel extraction, from natural gas burn-off, and all of these elements. I mean, fossil fuel methane, I know methane is methane, but in my mind, fossil fuel methane, once it's into the atmosphere, you've added even more to the whole system. If it was just all the cow methane, that could realistically be circulated back around the system. But because the agriculture model we're so used to now is driven by fossil fuel usage and fossil fuel fertilizer, it exasperates the whole thing. So I think your approach and the message you're trying to get across here is so valid, and I think will resonate with certainly many agricultural and farming communities, maybe in a much better way than previous policies and discussions around methane. So just well done, and delighted to hear it firsthand from you guys. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. And it is about that whole systems approach. So it's about taking the narrative just around the cow, but actually helping the farmer understand of all the inputs that are coming into the farm and the amount of diesel and stuff, and understand they're not solely responsible for the methane. So rice production and our degrading of our bogs are two also massive inputs. Then there was one of the things we learned from the methane project, because two of the agricultural partners, they're working on measuring ozone, and there was something like a 5 or 7% drop in grain crops across Europe because of the increase in ozone burning off the plants through stopping photosynthesis. So even if you're not in producing dairy or beef, if you're only talking about grain crops, because of the increased amount of methane and then that converting to ozone, that's turning around and causing issues with photosynthesis in the plants. So it's a wider conversation. But the amount of diesel we use, and it's about, for Talamh Beo, it's about coming with solutions. So yes, we understand all of these inputs are an issue, but we also know and understand that there's loads of solutions out there to help diversify our systems altogether.
Rachel? Sorry.
Hi, hello. Raquel. I would like to, I really enjoyed your presentation. I think it's very interesting, and especially coming from farmers initiatives. I'm just wondering, how will you engage with the consumers? Because then they will also have to be educated to prefer this kind of products coming from these alternatives from the industrialized agriculture, and engage more with the local communities and the local produced food.
So one of the reasons, like Talamh Beo is a farmers organisation, we're run by farmers, but we're also a community and citizen organisation, because we understand it's a whole food system approach that needs to be taken. So the farmer can turn around and he can diversify his system into more ecological, agroecological biodiversity systems, stop bringing in the inputs, but actually we also need the entire of society to be able to pay that farmer a fair price. At the moment we have a cap system, and the payments pretty much incentivize industrial commodity production. What we need to do is, but then the cost, the real true cost of that is hidden, and the taxpayer is paying for it somewhere else, so whether that's environment, biodiversity or climate. So we need to have a conversation with the community so they understand that actually if there is an issue with the climate and biodiversity loss, these are all ways they can support farmers. So it's a much wider conversation and needs to happen at different levels. One of the advantages of turning around and going to Electric Picnic and these other places was about saying what we're seeing from the perspective of the farmer, and then letting community back. So our position paper, yes, it's fixed at the moment, but it's only like it's evolving. So as we get more input and more engagement, the conversation, and like I said, it's about empathy. It's about understanding the farmer's perspective, and then the different types of farmers, but then the different people in community and society. But then also seeing the benefits that come by helping their farmers transition. It's about methane, but it's about the wider biodiversity. So if the consumer and our citizens understand by supporting those farmers that they're improving their water, they're improving their future for their children, and they're saving all that. Yeah. So we don't have the answers. All we're doing is kind of poking the bear by bringing a general overview and perspective onto it. Yeah.
I agree with you. People will recognize the benefits, but will they pay for the benefits that they have from this type of farming? That's my question.
So,
and how you educate them for such.
This is where policy is really important, and particularly coming into the new round of CAP engagement and the national interpretation of that. So at the moment, they're already paying for it, but they don't know they're paying for it. They're paying for all the environmental damage externally. There's a lot of subsidization that goes into the existing commodity and industrial system, but they don't see it directly. All they see is cheap food at the supermarket. All the costs of the environmental damage of that food, all of the other stuff that comes with it, all the health disadvantages to themselves and paying a doctor down the road, they're like hidden costs. So what we need is we need transparency, so people can see clearly the costs of industrialized food production as opposed to more nature biologically the system. But that is like, it's an ongoing conversation, and we have a good bit to go yet.
Thank you very much.
Sarah?
It's brilliant to see bioregioning coming in there. It's fantastic to see that word coming up and being a level at which we can start working. And I love the results are coming out very sort of similar to the kind of things that we were doing with the deep demo work that we did in 23-24, which I can share as well if you want to see, because I think it's something about, how can we stop being too fragmented and try to sort of add on top of each other, and it'd be great. So if you're going to go and speak to county councils and things like that, I really hope that we can stay together, because I've been travelling around Ireland talking a lot about the bioregional approaches now. So I think there's real potential to get a win-win thing here going. But also, just coming back to that last question, I think there's something about the bioregional approach is that we work very much by looking for all sorts of different parts of the system. So we would have a portfolio of different projects going on, and some of them are farmer-led, but some of them are consumer-led, and some of them are consumer-oriented. And we try and sort of see all the energy, all the different things going on in that particular bioregion. So, for example, in our Southeast bioregion at the moment, we were working with older people and trying to work out their role as consumers and driving change. And was it eco-literacy, or was it the cost, or was it the access? So we've been testing out different ways and finding out that access is more important than price for them, but also trying out new innovations in terms of price, and by having vouchers that would actually help them with that access more food. So there's lots of things you can do locally, I think, by treating it as one entangled system, rather than trying to have national sort of board buy more organic. We have to get down to that relationship based. You know where to access your healthy food, and you know that you can talk about it to your grandchildren and have intergenerational, all sorts of things you can do. Yeah.
That's really important, because it is the connection to our food system and our farmers and our environment, and that relationship, bringing the culture back into agriculture, that will inspire and engage people. But then also, like I say, more transparency in the system as it exists for the costs that are there. But definitely systems approach and systems thinking, that's the only way. Like, science is fantastic. We can drop down into an atom and down into a quark, or we can see the universe 100 million miles away. But over the years, they became very fragmented and separated. Now what we see in the last 10, 15, 20 years is all of these different departments and specialist areas coming in together and starting to overlay. So we need to take a step back and look how the whole system operates from the top, and how we're connected to the landscape and to the community, and that each landscape is different depending on the community as well. That's why in the past we had like thousands of different cultures around the world, because they were born of the food they ate, from the minerals that were in the land and the environment they existed in. So now we don't just have a monoculture of ryegrass, we have almost a monoculture of culture as well, like McDonald's and Coca-Cola, and so we need to diversify the food system so that we bring that biology back in, and the engagement with nature and stuff. And like with our Talamh Beo local food policy and recognition of the institutional recognition of local food producers is about ensuring people have that access to food. And a lot of time the excuse is used that, oh, it'll be too expensive to do it, but it's not actually too expensive to do it at all. It's just, it's not as profitable for the external shareholders. It's better for the internal shareholders, which is the community.
There's something about mixing the systems and the symptoms, because if you can demonstrate that it's possible, then you can change the system. But if you just focus on the system without also sort of showing what the future can look like, you have to do both at once. And then
and that's why it's great to, like, you know, you don't need to convince everybody at the moment. What we need to do is have people that understand what's happening and create those little islands of hope and those islands of practical experience. So the time will come when the vast majority of farmers will be under extreme pressure. And if the people that cause the issues or the situation in the first place are the only people presenting the solutions, they're presenting solutions that lead them farther down the same path. Whereas what we need to do is places they can go and open honest information so they can see that there's an alternative there and it works, you know, because again, our farming system is essentially just an economic unit at the moment. But there are a lot more values and there are a lot more things connected with our agriculture and our rural and our community than just economics. But unfortunately, economics tends to be the only paradigm. Paul?
Thanks very much. I would thoroughly endorse your last few words there. In order to kind of get away from the system, I'm afraid we're going to face some really difficult times ahead, and having the alternatives available, and really that does involve this kind of idea of a bioregional approach and circularity of nutrients. And of course, that's what mixed farming in the past was about. We've gone away from that towards a linear kind of commodity process. I do think it's really important to kind of bear in mind some difficult things. The fact is that if you have grain-fed, concentrate-fed feedlot beef or dairy, that is more methane efficient than grass-fed dairy and beef. The thing is, though, I think what we in more towards what you're talking about is we need to be increasing the number of people, fed per hectare of cropland. And that's where we are falling down right now. I mean, we are in a situation where we have big inputs and big outputs. Big outputs maybe, but even bigger inputs, relatively speaking, than we did, 50, 60 years ago. Effectively, efficiency has gone down, not up, in those terms. And that's, in a way, I think what one can say about what you're talking about. It's more efficient, actually, in feeding people and in nutrient circularity to do what you're talking about. And I think you've got to bear in mind the realities of efficiency and what that actually means. It does mean less meat and dairy and more plant-based production ultimately. But that's what comes out of a sensible approach to farming anyway. That's what historic farming produced anyway. So I think all credit to you. I love the graphics particularly, and I think you've done a good job. I just think it'd be good to be very clear about the facts about methane are that really it's about reducing particularly rumen production. A place like Denmark produces a similar amount of food, animal protein overall, but has half the methane. And why is that? Because they've gone over to more pigs and poultry, and they're growing grain on farms and less grass-fed. That's the reality. So I think we're going to bear these realities in mind, but I think your approach is what's necessary in order to deal with, well, what's to come, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, efficiency has been, that's kind of the word really. Things get more efficient, and it's about improving the efficiency. But unfortunately, a lot of the time when we focus just on efficiency or economics, we forget about the wider picture. And like Talamh Beo comes from a very unique perspective, as in around agroecology and food sovereignty. So yes, it might be slightly less efficient in the conversion of the protein into the animal that's on a plate, but actually the efficiency of getting your energy from the sun and using your biology to break down your minerals and your nutrients. So like I was involved with the transition, Kerry, it's a transition movement, and there was always the idea of the leaky bucket. At the moment, like you say, we've a linear system. You're going to the tap, you're filling up a bucket full of holes, and they're only delighted that by the time you get to the end of the yard that the bucket is empty again, you need to go back. So just more of a circular economy. And the methane is a really tough conversation, but we're not afraid of that. It's grand. And we don't need to convince everybody. We need just to convince enough people and hold a space for the conversation that there's an alternative there.
Good stuff.
Thank you. Good. Charles?
Hey, everyone.
Can I?
You can. Charles seems to have gone quiet there for a second. Go on, Donald.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's very interesting to look at this from outside. I'm outside Ireland, with 40 years of these discussions behind me. I really sign up to what Paul has said. You know, you have interesting ideas, and the whole systems approach is very valid. My general comment would be, you know, keep an eye on the science, because the pushback will use science. And so I can't really say more than that. I really admire what you're doing. Ireland, you know, obviously you can hear that I come from Ireland, but when I go back, I left Ireland in 1985, and when I go back now, I do go back, you know, fairly regularly, and it is really quite shocking the dead ends or cul-de-sacs that farmers have been driven into, and the treadmill. You say the treadmill, and I think the expression you use, which is really interesting, is "poke the bear." The bear has not been poked in Ireland like it has been poked in Germany or Britain or other places that I'm familiar with. And okay, there will be arguments, and there will be, you know, there will be difficult discussions, but the end point is you make people think more widely about all of this, and yeah, use the science as far as you can. Thank you.
This is one of the reasons we want to develop the agroecological tool, the TAPE tool, is to have science to build up what we're talking about. Unfortunately, like, science has been used for a couple of generations now, for a long time, to direct us down into exactly what we're doing. So science is great if it's honest, open science, not directed by business to a narrow outcome.
Yeah.
So if the science is honest and open and reflecting the true reality, well, then that's okay and really good. And again, it is a hard conversation, but it's about the conversation and the transition as we go through it. Yeah, very different conversations, but it's like, yeah, it's about engaging with people and like finding the common ground.
Yeah.
But we know as Talamh Beo that there are solutions there that are biologically and ecologically based, you know, and the science is there, but it's not the science that we'd normally be exposed to in Ireland or through our existing institutions, which is why we think the adaptation of agroecology and a wider perspective is really important. Thank you, Donald. Charles, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, just on that science bit, I was at a CAP consultative meeting this morning, and I listened to part of this on the way back. Anyhow, there was a good discussion about my science is better than your science, and there's still that going on in the world of agriculture. And the other thing is that the CAP, the new CAP, this is post 2027 CAP. It's going to take quite a long time to get the whole thing together, but it is still, you know, we need to feed the world. We don't need to feed ourselves. We just need to feed the world. And there's still that big gap between the big agri people and this, you know, the people with short supply chain. So it's going to be an ongoing discussion, and I will be talking to you many times between now and then.
Very good. Like, you know, we are driven into the system we are because we're told we need to feed the world. Being part of La Via Campesina and the wider movement, you're understanding in solidarity what happens in all of these externalized countries from ourselves is that the actual way you feed the world is you start by feeding yourself, and then you stop taking food and forcing our industrial practices on other parts of the world. So the ability to feed ourselves, and we know, for like, if 10% of the money that goes into developing commodity and export based systems was spent on local food systems and indigenous food systems within Ireland, we'd have a very strong, resilient basis going into the future. And we all know that like we're facing a huge convergence of crises across the board, and things are getting more and more fragile. So what happens tomorrow morning if the credit dries up or the inputs dry up? We're going to fall off a cliff. So that's why it's about food system transformation and helping with that transition and setting up models and giving examples so that when the time and the pressure comes, farmers can adapt better. And community. We need our allotments, we need our school gardens, we need all these kind of things that bring the education and the connection with our food into our community and our society, which then gives respect to the farmers that are producing the food. Otherwise, Bill Gates will be giving us something that's grown in the lab, like. All right. It is 29 minutes past 4. Is there any more comments or questions, or? No, very good. Thank you all very much. And yeah, keep following Talamh Beo. The Methane Matters was one project that we're running within Talamh Beo. We have a youth group, we have a short food supply chain, we have a local food producers group, we have a land access group. So like Talamh Beo is continuing the conversation built around agroecology and food sovereignty. Yeah, and we have a great bunch of people and we're gaining more traction all the time. There's a good story to be told.
And if you have free time, join us, become a member, help us. Poke the bear. We need more people to poke the bear.